Cameron spoke to workers in Edinburgh's financial district in a way he's never spoken before.
I think people can feel it's a bit like a general election, that you make a decision and 5 years later you can make another decision. If you're fed up with the effing Tories, give them a kick and then maybe we'll think again. This is totally different to a general election.
David Cameron raced out of Scotland just as he raced in. His message, very simple. This is not about me, this is not about those he called the effing Tories. It's not about the next 5 years. He says the title for this saga is Back from the Brink. Others may say it's over the edge.
You should be ashamed of yourself, mate. You should be ashamed. Shame on you, mate.
The guy in a suit from Westminster, the Englishman from the British Broadcasting Corporation.
It's 5 o'clock, very good evening. Our main story is the major intervention in the debate on Scottish independence by the Governor of the Bank of England. Mark Carney said that any plans for an independent Scotland to share the pound with the rest of the UK needed careful consideration.
Now, I wasn't sent to cover that story, but I remember sitting in my office in Westminster, watching our 5 o'clock news bulletin and seeing this very nuanced piece.
Mark Carney says he's not a politician, but he did a pretty good impression of one today. Pressed on the detail of what he meant in his speech,
I thought, I wonder if he was really that subtle. Part of my job, part of the job of being political editor at the BBC, is decoding what people in public life said, making it real for people, making it comprehensible. And frankly, I didn't think we were doing a very good job of that. So when I saw the actual text of the Governor of the Bank of England talking about clear risks of sharing the pound, that's what I tried to do on my blog. That's why I talked myself onto the 10 o'clock news that night.
The Scottish Government has stated, in the event of independence, it would seek to retain sterling as part of a formal currency union. They would need to consider carefully what the economics of currency unions suggest are the necessary foundations for a durable union, particularly given the clear risks if these foundations are not put in place.
The two words used by the Governor of the Bank of England to describe the pound being shared between an independent Scotland and the rest of the UK were clear risks, and the spectre was of a Eurozone crisis, a repeat, in other words, of runs on the banks, a run on sovereign debt, in other words, the spectre of a Greece or a Portugal or a Spain.
Well, all of a sudden, the Governor's speech had been reinterpreted as an outright assault on the idea of a sterling union between Scotland and England, which it hadn't been and wasn't.
You know, I know how hard all my colleagues in London work at trying to get it right. You believe that. It's in your DNA when you're a BBC journalist, and I'm not cynical about that at all. But I was quite surprised by some of my colleagues failing to understand their own assumption that the yes side was wrong, and that some of my colleagues, by no means all, not even a majority, but some of my colleagues who thought that our responsibility was to produce a series of pieces that would demonstrate how foolish it would be to vote yes.
Nick Robinson.
Didn't you got accused of political bias, I believe?
In Scotland?
Yes.
Yeah, it was a sort of warm welcome.
Our political editor, Nick Robinson, has the latest.
Just in the last few minutes, what I'm being told, yet to be confirmed, that the Royal Bank of Scotland will decide tomorrow that they will move their headquarters from this city of Edinburgh, historic shift, down to London in the event of a yes vote.
Thank you very much, First Minister. Nick Robinson, BBC News. Two, if I may. One specifically on RBS that you raised. Are you suggesting that the decision of RBS has no consequence, or do you accept that by moving their base to London, tax revenues would move to London, money will move out of Scotland? BP's boss says oil will run out. Why should a Scottish voter believe you, a politician, against men who are responsible for billions of pounds of profits?
Firstly, can I just correct you on a factual point, Nick? The corporation tax does not depend on registered office, but on economic activity. For example, our estimates on corporation tax for Scotland at the present moment don't include.
I had the letter from the Chief Executive of the Royal Bank of Scotland, Ross McEwen, pointing out that this was largely a technical matter. So I answered Nick's questions comprehensively on a live stream.
So I then come to what I think is now the most interesting matter, which is who in the Treasury, because I have here a screen grab from the BBC last night. I don't know if this was you, Nick, or one of your colleagues. A Treasury source told the BBC that it had discussed the plans with the Royal Bank of Scotland. Market-sensitive information, and it's a basic rule, cannot be released prior to the market announcement at 7 o'clock this morning. The Royal Bank of Scotland share price changed overnight. This is a matter of extraordinary gravity.
Quite obviously asking Alex Salmond a question which he didn't know the answer to.
Yeah, and I'd like to apologise for that now, if I could.
He said you heckled him, Nick, didn't he?
He did say I heckled him, yeah, because I said he didn't answer the question. I rung you, actually, because comics are very good at put-downs. Well, you know, you do put-downs for the audience when somebody heckles.
Go back to our friends in the international media, please. This is an international... Sorry, Nick, I'm going back to our friends in international media. Please, there. I mean, I'll tell you what, well, I've just read you the statement. Well, right, and I answered that question, Nick, this has been a lively campaign with heckling at many meetings across Scotland. This is the first opportunity the BBC have had to heckle at a meeting. Congratulations, Nick. I answered you. The corporation tax is based on... Yeah, remember the first part of the question? The corporation tax is based on economic activity, not on your registered office. In, for example, yes, Dick, please. In, for example, the statement I've given you, and, for example, in the Scottish Government calculations of corporation tax, we do not count the activities of Royal Bank of Scotland in London or NatWest or elsewhere. It's based, Nick, on economic activity. That is the rules of corporation tax.
Reporters have flown to Edinburgh from all over the world. But Alex Salmond knows that for victory, he needs to reassure voters at home. Why should a Scottish voter believe you, a politician, against men who are responsible for billions of pounds of profits? He didn't answer, but he did attack the reporting of...
There was a report in the Telegraph about a rally in Perth.
Yes.
And it says the mood turned ugly after Nick Robinson briefly appeared on a balcony. A loud boo reverberated around the hall, accompanied by jeers and verbal abuse. The crowd cheered when Mr Robinson disappeared from sight. However, they booed again after he appeared to take his seat. Any basis, do you think, for that?
Somebody in the audience just said yes.
What was the question?
Why should voters trust you, a politician, rather than businessmen who say that independence might cause one or two problems?
It's like you're suggesting that businessmen should totally be trusted, though. Is that the case?
No.
Do you think there's any justification at all, seriously?
What do I... Are we doing that sort of praise? This has become points of view, hasn't it?
No, sorry, I asked you the same question twice, Nick.
Yeah. To our friends in the international media.
Thank you very much.
Sort of maybe 6 months ago, I'd completely trust the BBC, and now this has all come out and the lying and the deceit. I'm completely shocked. And if they've deceived us in this way, how do they deceive us in other ways? And all the news that we watch.
I find it hard to believe anything now that they say.
I think what you saw yesterday was an expression of anger, an expression of hurt that some people felt the BBC wasn't doing its job as a public service broadcaster.
OK, over what, though, exactly? I mean, is the media, the BBC particularly, being condemned for drawing attention to things that the Yes campaign just doesn't want to hear? Does it not want to have pertinent, pointed questions?
The default tough question for me and for people from the Yes side was, why on earth would anybody want to leave the UK? Whereas the default tough question to the No campaign was, why are you running such a bad campaign?
I think it was a lively and vigorous campaign, Frank.
Oh, really?
I do. You can stick the licence fee up your arse. That indeed. There were.
I love a multiple choice.
There were in.
I mean, one of the reasons the BBC is biased against it and never gets mentioned is that the BBC raises a licence fee of 300 odd million in Scotland. They won't release the actual figures, but it's probably 320 million. And they spend, they say, 160 million, 60 million of which is very probably finessed.
By finesse, do you mean?
The shows that aren't Scottish coming up and, you know, getting a picture outside Glasgow Central, Waterloo Road, things like that, things that aren't actually made in Scotland. So it's probably a £200 million a year subsidy to the BBC.
Well, I think Lord Burt said exactly that the other day, actually. He said it would cost us an awful lot of money if Scotland leave.
Sorry, quite a big question maybe to end on, but I'm just wondering if you'd ever had any difficulty remaining unbiased while you were working for the BBC.
Yeah, I get asked that quite a lot. And the answer, and I don't mean in a glib way, is no and yes, right? Broadly no, but there's a bit of yes. The biggest... Look, the reason I said no and yes, the hardest thing is to deal with the bias you're not conscious of. It's your assumptions. Those are hard, and that's why you've got to have friends and colleagues and other people who say, are you sure you got that right? Have you thought of this? And if you don't constantly challenge yourself, which I try to do, you shouldn't be in journalism.
And finally...
When I wrote the script line, he didn't answer. Now, looking back, even the addition of the word really would have made it better, because in the end it was a subjective view as to whether he did or didn't properly answer the question, and that's really up to viewers to decide, not for me. So it wasn't a clever script line, and in truth, you know, given the chance, I would have rewritten it.
I am joined now by our political editor, Nick Robinson. A warning for you, some viewers may find parts of his report complete bollocks. Well, the news I'm hearing tonight, Hugh, is a new poll published tomorrow but leaked to me tonight, Hugh, suggests that the chances of your pet dog, the one with the waggly tail, Hugh, being put down with a bolt in the skull are 100% greater in the event of a yes vote. Does Scotland want that on its conscience? Only Scotland can decide.